Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Living Fast Forward. I'm Glenn Harper.
I'm Julie Smith.
What's going on, Julie?
Well, I thought we were going to rename this podcast after your last outro.
Well, sometimes it just pops in my head. I say what I feel and say what I
know.
think. But today's episode, I think we should explore what does the environment of an entrepreneur look like? Because there's what people think it looks like, and then there's the brutal reality of what it really is. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think
Why don't you tell me what you think people think it's like?
Well, I think social media has glorified entrepreneurship. And so when you see social media, you see this perfect world of the entrepreneur. You see, oh, they're having so much fun. They may have all these people around them. They have this team. They get to do this. They have this. They go on these trips. But what you don't see is the reality.
The reality is it's a tough pill to swallow, but that is why entrepreneurs do it, because they have in their head a vision or a way they want to do things, and nobody else can interpret that but them. So it's a very isolated world that you live in as an entrepreneur. It's lonely, frankly. You're there by yourself.
Yeah, and I think when we talk to a lot of our podcast guests, it comes up, as you get to a point in your career as an entrepreneur where you realize you're on an island.
You're all by yourself.
And, how did you get there? What happened, right? And it's like I think an entrepreneurship trait is loneliness. Like, you're okay with being the lone wolf on the island and surviving.
Right. It's just at one time when you realize that who do you turn to commiserate or to share with the successes or share the setbacks. If you don't have that person that is really, part of you that you can talk to, whether it's a spouse unit, a business partner, a good friend, whatever that looks like, that person that help you to share that burden, it's really hard because you got to do it on your own.
Well, and I think if you look at the most successful entrepreneurs, they do have teams of people that they have built in trust over time. But I think before that and before they got, to that point, they could probably resonate with, being on an island alone.
Yeah, they're on the cruise ship drinking margaritas. They wake up and they're on a deserted island. How did this happen to me? And I'm here doing everything. And then you got to bring it back in and say, okay, this is just the reality of it. And you recognize where you are and what do I need to do to adjust that to get where I would like to be? But those are the peaks and valleys. And when you're at the top of the mountain, everybody wants to look at you and celebrate with you. At the bottom, nobody wants to be there with you. So you got to figure out how to navigate that on your own, unfortunately.
It's the craziest thing, the peaks and valleys. We talk about that a lot, too, on the podcast. And, I think what you just described is so true. But I think also as you go through more peaks and valleys, your circle gets smaller and smaller because you want to know the people that are also cheering for you at the top are also the people sitting in that valley with you when it's low.
Well, giving you a hand and pulling you up. And sometimes that's all an entrepreneur needs. Just a little pat on the back, a little, hey, we got you. Hey, you're good. Go out and do it again for another day.
I think the whole point of this podcast is to understand, relate with our listeners, just say we recognize the loneliness. We recognize that trait of an entrepreneur and you're not alone, which is, the whole purpose of starting this podcast, 3.5 years ago, was because we saw this niche group of people and, we related to them in the fact of it's lonely out there. How do we create a sense of community around, this loneliness of entrepreneurship where we're all going through the same things. We've all had the peaks and valleys. We've all, been up at night questioning, what are we doing? And in reality, it's why we started the podcast was loneliness.
That's it. We used to have somebody to commiserate with and realize that I'm not the only one. So I think that's the takeaway of this is that you're okay being by yourself and being lonely and you have to struggle with those. But, if you can expand that a little bit to have a few trusted people around you where you can lament that with, it can be quite helpful and therapeutic. Ultimately, it goes back on your shoulders. You got to carry the burden as the entrepreneur because that's just the way it is. But it would be nice to be able to let that guard down and share that with somebody for a little encouragement or celebration, whatever that looks like.
Or they might give you the shortcut.
Wouldn't that be cool? There you have it. Well, there's another edition of Life in the Fast Lane. This is Glenn Harper
and Julie Smith.